Emily Parker lived a quiet life in a sleepy suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Her days were a predictable routine. Breakfast at 7, getting her son Dylan ready for second grade, packing lunches, tidying up, and occasionally baking something sweet for the neighbors. Her husband Mark worked long hours as a regional sales manager for a flooring company. He was often away 3 or 4 days a week, and even when he was home, his mind was still wrapped up in sales targets, emails, and the constant ping of his phone. They'd been married for 9 years. Their home was neat, modest, and filled with framed pictures of happier times, family vacations, birthdays, Dylan's preschool graduation. But in recent years, those pictures felt more like decorations than memories. Emily couldn't remember the last time she and Mark had truly talked, really looked at each other, or even laughed together. She knew Mark loved them in his own way. He paid the bills, fixed the leaky faucet when reminded, and never complained about her spending. But his emotional absence left a silence in the house she had learned to live with. Dylan, all of 7, was the light of her life. His endless questions, his drawings stuck on the fridge, and the way he called her mommy in the mornings gave her reasons to smile. She poured all of herself into being a good mother, telling herself that was enough. She joined the PTA, volunteered in the library once a week, and tried not to let the loneliness take up too much space in her heart. Then one spring, a new family moved into the house next door. The Ryans, Nick and his dog Max, were a noticeable change from the older retirees who had lived there before. Nick was in his late 30s, recently divorced, and had moved in for a fresh start. Emily noticed him unloading boxes from a U-Haul with casual ease one afternoon while Dylan played in the yard. Max, a friendly golden retriever, bounded over the fence to sniff Dylan's crayons, and the introductions happened naturally after that. "Sorry about him," Nick had said with a grin, jogging over. "Max thinks he's welcome everywhere." "No worries," Emily had replied, laughing. "Dylan doesn't seem to mind." Nick was friendly, funny, and easy to talk to. Over the next few weeks, they had casual chats across the lawn or by the mailbox. He asked about the best local coffee shop, the school system, and where to take Max for walks. Emily, always polite, offered suggestions and baked a batch of banana muffins to welcome him properly. He returned the gesture a few days later with a box of fancy herbal teas, saying he wasn't much of a baker. It wasn't long before they found themselves talking more often about harmless things at first, the weather, neighborhood news, funny stories about their kids. Nick had joint custody of his daughter, who visited every other weekend. Emily found herself looking forward to those short conversations. It was nice to be asked how her day was going and to feel someone really cared about the answer. One Saturday morning, Mark left early for a 3-day business trip. Emily had promised Dylan pancakes, and as she stood on the porch shaking out a tablecloth for their little patio table, Nick waved from his yard. Max ran over again, his tail wagging. "Pancakes?" Nick asked, sniffing the air. "You're making me jealous." Emily smiled. "You're welcome to join us. I made too many anyway." Nick hesitated for a second before saying, "You sure?" "I'll bring coffee." And just like that, the morning felt different. He brought over a flask of strong black coffee and sat down with them. Dylan giggled at Max trying to catch a blueberry with his mouth, and the three of them chatted casually, the way people do when there's no agenda. It felt natural, not like a scene from a movie, but like something that could happen on any suburban porch. After Dylan ran off to play in the backyard, the conversation between Emily and Nick deepened. He asked about her interests, her job before becoming a full-time mom, and whether she ever thought about going back to work. No one had asked her that in years. She talked about how she had studied interior design in college, how she used to sketch rooms and dream of opening her own home decor studio someday. "You still could," Nick said sincerely. "You've got that eye for detail." Emily laughed quietly, a little self-consciously. "That was a long time ago." Nick looked at her with something like recognition. "Doesn't mean it's over." There was nothing improper in what he said, no lingering look, no inappropriate touch, but something about the moment lingered long after he left. She thought about it that evening as she folded laundry, as she packed Dylan's lunch, and as she climbed into bed alone, the other side still empty. Over the next few weeks, the conversations grew a little longer. Emily began to notice how easy it was to talk to Nick, how he listened without judgment or distraction. She found herself walking Max with him sometimes while Dylan rode his bike ahead. They talked about books, about the pressure of raising children alone most of the time, and about how strange it was to feel invisible in your own life. Still, Emily told herself there was no line being crossed. They were neighbors, friends. That was all. One day, when Nick's daughter Sophie was visiting, Emily helped set up a small art station on her porch so Sophie and Dylan could paint. She and Nick sat on the steps, sipping iced tea, watching the children. The conversation drifted into deeper waters about their marriages, their regrets, their fears. "My marriage wasn't bad," Nick said after a pause. "We just stopped seeing each other, like two strangers living in the same house." Emily looked at him, something tightening in her chest. She knew exactly what he meant. "I feel like I'm disappearing a little more each year," she said softly, "like I'm only here to keep the machine running." Nick didn't offer false comfort. He just nodded. That moment of silent understanding was louder than any words. Emily tried to pull back after that. She told herself she was being foolish, reading too much into harmless moments. She stopped walking. Max stopped lingering near the fence. But it wasn't easy. The pull was still there. Not romantic, not yet. But something warm and kind and alive. Something she missed in her life with Mark, who now barely noticed when she was quiet or when she cried in the shower late at night. Then came the evening it all changed. A late summer storm had knocked out power across the neighborhood. Mark was out of town again. Dylan was scared and Emily was fumbling with candles. Nick showed up at the door with a flashlight and a calm voice. He helped get a few lamps lit, stayed for a while to keep Dylan distracted with ghost stories and a few rounds of Uno by candlelight. When Dylan finally went to bed, the house felt peaceful. Emily offered Nick a cup of tea and they sat in the living room, the candlelight casting soft shadows. The conversation was quiet, gentle, filled with pauses that didn't feel awkward. They talked about how life turns out differently than you imagine at 20. How you learn to carry disappointments quietly. At one point, Emily said, "Sometimes I wonder if this is just how life is supposed to feel." Nick didn't answer right away. Then looking at her with genuine care, he said, "Or maybe you're just waiting for someone to remind you that it doesn't have to." There was no dramatic music, no sudden moment of betrayal, but something shifted quietly that night in Emily's heart, and it wasn't over yet. The next morning brought sunshine and the usual hum of routine. Dylan munched on his cereal, humming a song he'd heard on TV while Emily packed his lunch. The night before still lingered in her mind, though she tried to shake it off. Nothing had happened. Nothing anyone could point to. Still something inside her had changed. Nick didn't come over that morning. She saw him walking Max around the block, but from a distance. They didn't wave. Maybe he felt the same subtle shift and didn't know how to respond. Emily busied herself with chores and errands. She tried reading, then called her sister just to talk about something normal. But by the afternoon she found herself watching the clock wondering. Days passed like that. They didn't talk as much, but when they did it carried a new kind of tension. Not discomfort, just something unspoken. Nick remained kind, never overstepping, never hinting at anything inappropriate. But even a small moment like handing her the leash or brushing past her on the sidewalk seemed to carry weight now. And Emily noticed herself paying attention in ways she hadn't before. The way he laughed, the tired lines around his eyes, the way he listened. One evening, Mark returned from another business trip. He came in with the usual suitcase, tired eyes, and a half-hearted smile. Emily greeted him with politeness, not warmth. They sat across from each other at dinner, listening to Dylan chatter about a science project. Mark asked the right questions, nodded at the right times. But as soon as dinner ended, he retreated to the bedroom with his laptop. Emily stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes long after they were clean. The kitchen felt colder than it had the night of the power outage. She dried her hands, turned off the lights, and joined Mark in bed. He was already asleep, his face lit by the glow of his phone screen moments earlier. She lay on her side, facing the wall, eyes wide open. The next day, she ran into Nick at the grocery store. It was accidental. I sizzle 6 by the bread. Both of them paused. "Hey," Nick said lightly. "Haven't seen you much." "Yeah," she replied. "Been keeping busy?" They stood there for a moment, awkward but not uncomfortable. Then Nick smiled softly. "Listen, I don't want things to be weird." "They're not," Emily said quickly. Too quickly. "I just miss talking with you, that's all," he added. And she realized she missed it too. Not for anything more than what it had been. Conversation, kindness, connection, a feeling of being noticed. They continued talking again, more cautiously this time. In public places, shorter conversations. Emily still kept her boundaries, though she felt herself slowly growing dependent on the feeling she got from their time together. It wasn't just Nick. It was the version of herself she saw in his eyes. Someone interesting, thoughtful, worthy of attention. She tried sincerely to rekindle something with Mark. One Friday night, she suggested they go out to dinner, just the two of them. He agreed, surprised but not resistant. They went to a local Italian place they used to love in their early years. Emily wore a soft blue dress she hadn't taken out in months. Mark complimented her, but only after she prompted him. Over dinner, Emily tried to talk about things beyond Dylan or bills. She asked about his work, his goals, even brought up a new decorating project she'd been considering. Mark nodded politely, offered a few generic responses, but his mind seemed elsewhere. His phone buzzed twice. He checked it the second time. "I'm listening," he said, putting it face down on the table, but the moment had already dimmed. Later that night, back at home, Emily asked him a question she hadn't dared in years. "Do you think we're happy?" Mark looked at her confused. "Of course. Why wouldn't we be?" Emily shrugged. "I don't know. It just feels like we're surviving, not living." Mark sighed. This is just life. Gets routine. That's normal." She nodded. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was expecting too much, but the emptiness didn't feel normal. It felt like something no one wanted to talk about. As weeks passed, Nick remained in her life like a quiet rhythm. They texted now and then, nothing inappropriate, just check-ins. He invited her and Dylan over for a small barbecue one Saturday. A few other neighbors were there, and everything was above board. But when Nick handed her a plate, his hand brushed hers and she didn't move away. That night, after Dylan had gone to bed, Emily sat outside on her porch with a blanket around her shoulders. The night was still, the stars dim. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Nick. "Thanks for coming today. You being there made it feel like home." She stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back slowly. "Thank you for making me feel seen." She deleted it before hitting send. She turned off her phone and sat in the quiet. Emily didn't want to be the kind of woman who blurred lines, but she also didn't want to spend the rest of her life numb. It wasn't about Nick. Not really. It was about the aching loneliness, the years of silence in her own marriage and the parts of herself that had been buried beneath motherhood and duty. One afternoon, she stood in front of the mirror and studied her reflection. Not to check her makeup or fix her hair, but to actually see herself. For the first time in a long time, she wondered who was she beyond being a wife and mother. What did she want? What did she deserve? That night, she wrote in her journal something she hadn't done in years. She filled pages with thoughts, not about Nick specifically but about herself. About how she felt stuck in a life that looked fine on paper but felt hollow in practice. About how she'd stopped expecting joy and started accepting quiet disappointment. She wrote until her hand hurt and tears fell onto the page. And still no lines had been crossed. Not yet. But in the quiet spaces of her heart, she felt something stirring, something that couldn't be ignored much longer. And she knew whatever happened next would change everything. The days that followed were filled with both clarity and confusion for Emily. She moved through her routines with a heightened awareness of every decision, every moment of silence, and every word left unspoken. Her life on the surface hadn't changed. She still packed lunches, helped Dylan with homework, folded laundry while the news played in the background. But inside something was shifting. It wasn't about Nick anymore. Not entirely. It was about her. She began doing small things for herself again. She signed up for an online interior design course, a quiet first step toward the dreams she'd once put aside. She began journaling every night, not just about her feelings, but about her goals, ideas, and reflections. She stopped apologizing to herself for wanting more than the quiet hum of survival. Mark noticed small differences but said little. He commented once that she seemed more distracted than usual, and she gave a vague smile in return. He didn't press. He rarely did. Nick, on the other hand, continued to be present but careful. Their conversations remained friendly with just enough space to keep things appropriate but not cold. They both knew a line had been tiptoed around but not crossed. Still, that line felt thinner every day. One afternoon, Dylan was at a birthday party and the house was unusually quiet. Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea watching the wind stir the trees. Nick walked by with Max and as usual their eyes met. This time he stopped. "Got time for a walk?" he asked gently. She hesitated but nodded. They walked in silence at first, Max trotting ahead on the leash. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the sidewalk. They reached a quiet corner near the small neighborhood park and sat on a bench. No one else was around. "I've been thinking," Nick began, voice low, "that maybe we should take some space." Emily didn't answer right away. She had wondered if he would say that. Maybe even hoped he would, because deep down she knew this path could only go two ways and both came with consequences. "I get it," she said finally. "I've been thinking too." He looked at her, his eyes kinder. "For you. I care about you, Emily, probably more than I should, but I don't want to be the reason something breaks." Her eyes filled, but she blinked quickly. "You're not. It was already broken. I just didn't want to admit it." They sat quietly for a moment, the wind moving through the leaves like a whisper. "I need to figure out what I want," she continued, voice steady. "Not just in my marriage, in my life." Nick nodded. "You deserve to be happy, to feel seen. So do you," she said softly. When they parted that day, it wasn't dramatic or tearful, just a quiet goodbye between two people who had connected deeply but knew their story couldn't continue in the same way. That night, Emily sat down with Mark. The television was on, but she turned it off. He looked at her puzzled. "We need to talk," she said. Mark paused. "Is something wrong?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe it's been wrong for a long time." He sat up straighter, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "I'm not angry," she continued. "But I'm not happy either. I don't think we really see each other anymore. We function, but we don't live." Mark rubbed his face, caught off guard. "Is this about someone else?" The question hung in the air. Emily hesitated. "Remember, this is about me, about us, about the space between us that keeps growing." Mark leaned back, quiet for a moment. "I guess I thought this was just how life goes." "I used to think that too," she said, "but I don't want to go through the motions anymore. I want something real with or without you." The conversation lasted a long time. There were no raised voices, no ultimatums, just honesty. For the first time in years, they really talked. In the weeks that followed, they tried counseling. They worked on communication, carving out small pieces of time to reconnect. Mark, to his credit, made efforts, real ones. He left his phone in the other room at dinner. He asked questions. He listened. And Emily in turn let herself soften. She let go of the bitterness. Whether their marriage would fully recover, she didn't know yet, but she was finally being honest with herself. As for Nick, they waved politely when they passed each other. The warmth remained, but the space between them was respected. One day, she found a small envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a card with a simple note. "Keep designing your life. Don't shrink to fit inside it." And she smiled. No reply was needed. Months passed. Emily finished her course. She began offering design consultations to neighbors. She rediscovered parts of herself that had been sleeping for years. The story didn't end in scandal, heartbreak, or drama. It ended in reflection, growth, and quiet decisions made with clarity. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that for Emily was finally enough. She tucked the card into the back of her journal, closed it gently, and stepped outside to where Dylan was playing in the yard. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over everything. And in that moment, she felt at peace with her choices, her flaws, and the path ahead.